Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Matchless is thy power, wisdom, justice, mercy, and love and glory. Thank you so much for the Son that you offered up in place of our sin. Thank you so much for the gospel and the gospel plan of salvation, which allows us to avail ourselves of your will if we will follow it in accordance with your will. And we ask for the guidance and we ask for the strength. And we pray that this lesson be scripturally sound and that it bring together some key elements of the Bible that help us increase our appreciation of your hand in affairs of men. We ask, Heavenly Father, as we do this, that it strengthen us in our desire and our ability to share your word with the rest of the world and share your glory and your involvement in our affairs. We ask, Heavenly Father, that you be with us as we study, that you be with those who are online. We thank you for bringing all those who are here with us today in safely, and we thank you for taking them safely home and protecting us throughout the week that we may do your will. We thank you for the protections that you've offered us and for the healing that you've offered those of us who are from illnesses, and we thank you for being with Fran as she struggles, and we thank you for being with Trent Wild as he is his new anti-rejection medication is kicking in, and he's starting to be more comfortable with that new kidney. We thank you that Karen has come out of the hospital and is doing so much better. We ask that you be with Judy's sister as she continues to struggle with an aneurysm, and we ask for healing on that one as well. We know that you have all these things under your hand. We ask that you be with all of us who are traveling and keep them safe as well and bring them back safely. We ask that you be with our military personnel wherever they are, and we ask that you be with our first responders and our community as we continue to recover from the storm which was so devastating to this area. And we ask that you be with all those who are now working to continue the recovery. God, this prayer in your precious Son's name. Certainly there are many more things which we can take to God in prayer, and so ask you to do that. I also ask you, I'll ask you again, and if I don't, please remind me as people come in, if you've already picked up your bulletin, I'd like for you to go in there and put on the prayer list Trent Wild. That's Judy's nephew. He has one kidney and he is struggling, and it is a transplant, and he is struggling with it. But I will mention that, or will not mention that again as we start our service. Or perhaps Jim will mention it as well. I apologize for not getting that in there. I promise I will do better next week. I'll get that and I'll get something else. But anyway, we're starting the book of Esther, and of course, as I do, I like to do an introduction, and I thought I had done an introduction, but did not find one. So, but that's okay too, because it gave me a chance to kind of familiarize myself with it as I kind of rebuilt it a little bit. But I like to do these subtitles because of and try to outline the role that these people play in God's plan. And so Esther, we see that Esther is an instrument of God, and we will find that out. And it's very interesting to know a few things about this, and we'll get to them as we go on. So I'm trying to kind of whet your appetite here as we go along. So we're going to talk about the author. This is going to be short, so we don't know for sure who the author was. But we know that he knew close details of this narrative and probably had a close personal knowledge. And certainly we see his inspiration in the writing. Okay? And when we see that God purposely gave us the impression of his movement in the background of all these things. And it might well have been Mordecai, or it might well have been Ezra the scribe. Remember that Ezra was in the court with them at the same time. Mordecai was I guess you'd call him a rabbi at the time. But we don't know exactly when it was written. We know that it recounts events that are historically established, and so we can establish a timeline, if you will. And we know that it was about 40 years after the temple was rebuilt, and about 30 years before Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. Remember, that was that 70-year gap, and so it's that period of time in that gap. And if you'll remember, there was a lot of conflict going on at that time because of the temple, and also because now the word was that they were going to be rebuilding the walls. And so there were a lot of area governors who had the king's ear, who were maneuvering to try to stop this from happening. And they went to some pretty great lengths, and there's a conspiracy in here that will just about curl your toes. Okay, so. But it was about 50 years after the Jews actually began returning to Palestine in 536 BC. And so Esther, the book of Esther, records some events that were prior to the time of Nehemiah, and they may have made the work of Nehemiah possible by her activities in the past. Because Nehemiah was there at a time when conspiracy was basically eradicated Jewish people. In the kingdom. But Esther became the queen about 478 BC, and that is a very interesting account as well. And we know that about 5 years later she was able to save the extermination, and we will see that as we go through this account. Okay, but these details are very important in the event of biblical history, and that's why this book is here. That's why it's significant. That is why God wants us to have it and study it, because it talks about the deliverance of the Jewish people from annihilation. And we know that in Jeremiah 30, verse 11, God had promised that the Jews would continue as a distinct people. And if you'll bear with me, I'll go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 30, verse 11. Let me just kind of go over that real quick. He said, I am with thee, saith the Lord, to save thee, though I make a full end of nations whither I have scattered thee. Remember, he's talking about the restoration of Israel at that point. Yet will I not make a full end of thee, but I will correct thee in measure, and will not leave thee altogether unpunished. And so he promised that he would, though he would punish them, he would actually protect them as well, save them, and put them where they needed to be. So that was his plan. And that plan was important because the seed line of Christ was still unfolding. Right? And to protect that seed line, the Jewish nation had to be protected, and had they been eliminated from existence, that would not work. So we know that God was not going to stand for that, and Esther is how he did it. But I know that we will also come to the realization that had Esther not done so, God would have found another way. Okay? All right, so Esther shows how the Jews were delivered from death. It also shows how they fell under that threat of death. Okay, and that's why this book is important. And there was a Jewish feast. Don't ask me what the Feast of Purim is, but it is something that was begun in commemoration of the deliverance of the Jews by Esther. Right? The place and the people involved in the events of Esther. We'll start with Persia. Persia was the place in Esther 1, verses 1. Those that area and the size of that area and the things that were going on, and the Medes and the Persians had united in 539 BC to conquer Babylon. The capital city of Shushan, which was actually the southern portion of Medo-Persia, it was located east of Babylon, about 200 miles, 150 miles north of the Persian Gulf. Now, That's a pretty vast area when you talk about it. So we're talking about a great distance here, several hundred miles distant between Babylon and Shushan, all right, which was the summer palace. And we know that Daniel, one of Daniel's visions came while he was in the palace in Shushan. Okay? But as I pointed out, look at the extent, and let me step up here, maybe I can get this. So for those who are online looking, see if I can get this. You see that that the Persian Empire was vast indeed. It went all the way over to the coasts of India, and here's the southern palace here. Up in here is where Babylon is. Okay, and we see Syria, and here is Palestine, an area that they had called Judea, but also Egypt fell under their sway, and Asia Minor, called Lydia then, and Thrace, which was actually the eastern portion of Greece and the Caucasus up here. Okay, so and this whole area around the Black Sea and the mouth of the Black Sea, in this area right here, the Hellespont in those days. The Bosporus is this opening here from the Black Sea into the lake here. Actually, it's a salt water. And then continues to empty through the Dardanelles, which is a much wider portion. But I note here that this was actually quite narrow at one time, and only during the rainy season, when the waters were empty, would it swell here to be an area that was large enough that it was not easily forded by putting barges together for an army. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as we go. And I imagine I should have kept this thing because I think I'm having more than one slide in a row here. We'll talk about Jesus, as he is called in the Bible. That is an Akkadian name. I might say a Neo-Babylonian name. Jesus. It is a Persian name. The Greeks called him Xerxes, and he was. History relates that he was a very cruel tyrant and a very and inclined toward sensual pleasure, drinking and women and carousing and things like that. But we know that he at one point invaded Greece with the largest army that had ever marched into battle. And the incident to that is the story of Pythias, who was a rich Lydian, part of Asia Minor at the time. And Xerxes drafted men into service. Okay, and he drafted all five of Pythias' sons. And Pythias offered the king a bribe. He actually gave him a great deal of money to help pay for the war against Greece. But he asked him, as a result of that, to release his youngest son so that he could stay with the family. Well, Xerxes wasn't very happy about that, so it was time for them to march. He marched them out in front of the whole formation, cut them in half, dragged the pieces aside of the whole army, marched between the two halves of Pythias' youngest son. No good deed goes unpunished, as they say. So, but I know at one point that he was angry when the storm destroyed the bridge. We talked about the Bosporus, that narrow part. They were working on a bridge, building a bridge, and the storm came up and it knocked the bridge down. Well, he had the builders beheaded. Okay, and then history records, or at least there are accounts, that he ordered his army to grab sheaves of grain and flail the Hellespont into submission. Obviously, that didn't work. Okay, but so he was the king of Persia from 485 to 465 BC. We're talking about there, counting backwards. That's about a 20-year reign. The first part of it was marked by the campaign that began in 483, where he actually tried to continue his father's campaign. His father's campaign was also not particularly successful against the Greeks, but he pulled together a vast army, and However, he was defeated. But I want to talk to you. I'm going to basically read this. Here, we're talking about the Battle of Salamis, which you see indicated there at 480. And after that, Xerxes withdrew for a while. Of course, there was at least one more unsuccessful campaign, and it created such hate and discontent that some of his own viziers actually assassinated him. But let me read this to you. The Battle of Salamis. It was a naval battle fought in 480 BC between an alliance of Greek city-states under the general Themistocles and the Persian army, the Persian Empire under Xerxes. The Greeks won, but the battle was fought in the strait between the mainland and Salamis, an island in the Saronic Gulf near Athens, and it was the high point of the second Persian invasion, the second unsuccessful Persian invasion. Of course, it would succeed for a while because to block the Persian advance, and this is going to ring a bell. To block the Persian advance, a small force of Greeks blocked the pass at Thermopylae. Let me see if I might actually have a map of Thermopylae. Okay. Let me see if I can. Okay, so here you see a general map of Sparta, and you see Athens. You see Athens here, and this area here is where the battle occurred, or Salamis. All right. Let me see if I can go forward. We look at the path of Thermopylae Pass right here, which was a very narrow pass at the time. It has since been opened up and into a plain that's been excavated, and so it is a much wider area. That pass was how the Greeks were getting into this to cut off Athens and Thrace in here. Okay, and so these soldiers, by the way, they died to a man because they were betrayed by someone who King Leonidas had banished, and he showed them the way to get around the back of them, and they flanked them, and they eventually destroyed them. But 300 men held off an army of nearly 200,000 for days. Meanwhile, a sea battle was taking place. Okay, and so the resulting battle of Thermopylae, King Leonidas and all of his men were lost. But the Greeks, although outnumbered, okay, the Allies, the Persians started sacking cities, but they moved only as far as they could. And Themistocles, the general, put together an alliance to counter the Persians. All right. Now let me see if I've got another map here, because I want to show you something interesting, and that is you might get an impression of the size of the forces here when you look at the battle. But you see that this whole island, this island, the Persian fleet was arrayed throughout a complete frontier. They had the Ionians with them. They had the Egyptians with them. Remember that Egypt at that time was part of the Persian Empire. And they put their fleet to block the western entrance here, and they thought that they had the Spartans, or the Spartans and the Athenians and the Greek alliances here cut off and defeated. But there was a problem. They had so many ships that they got in each other's way. They couldn't maneuver. The Spartans had smaller, more mobile ships. There was another thing, that is that they were not under sail power, they were under polar power. So they were being rowed, but the Spartan fleet was being rowed by dedicated Greeks and Spartans. The barges of the Persian fleet were being manned and rowed by slaves. Not particularly dedicated, and not perhaps as disciplined as they would be. The Spartans used a trident,
It was long, it was probably 80 feet long, 60 to 80 feet long, depending upon the size, and it had a long, hard oak prow that stuck under the water line and projected out about 12 to 14 feet, maybe 20 feet, depending upon the design, and it was capped with copper or brass, okay? And it was pointed. And so what they would do is maneuver so that they could catch the Greek ship's broadside, pierce their hull below the water line, back off and let them sink. The first torpedo, if you will, okay? But it involved the entire ship. And they were so disciplined and so maneuverable, and there was enough force that they knew what they were doing. They had practiced this all along. And so a small force of Greek triremes routed a massive naval fleet at Salamis. And so the king was never really the same again. Now, he had succeeded his father. As he continued his campaign, he spent several years trying to achieve the goal that Darius had not been successful. But it weakened his influence and weakened his power, and then whenever he was lost, when he lost the campaign when he lost that campaign in the battle of Salamis, and the Greeks won, the Persian forces lost their vitality, and so they were never able to defeat the Greeks again after that. And eventually, a group of Persian nobles murdered Xerxes, according to World Book inside the Greek. But it's interesting to note that these cases illustrate that a massacre such as is designed or such as is outlined in this book could actually occur. And we'll note also that there are some. We'll note that there are some things we talk about the fullness of time and how the different parts, the different campaigns, and how the Babylonians contributed and how the Persians contributed, and the Babylonians, of course, carried the Jews into exile, but they had a vast commerce system of roads. Of course, the Romans got credit for a lot of that. But what they really did was improve the old Babylonian Empire roads and their aqueducts as well. So they got credit for a lot of things that the Babylonians and the Medo-Persians laid the groundwork for. But we know that the Jews had been conquered by the Babylonians, and when that happened, of course, there was great slaughter and the deportation of most of their population. Came in 3 separate areas. They took the king and the nobles. In 597, they took artisans, and then in 586, they took everybody but the old and the infirm, and basically depopulated, and then in that vacuum, those who the Assyrians had put into that area slid in behind them, if they will. But in 536 BC, after Babylon had been conquered by the Medes and the Persians, the Jews were permitted to return to their homeland. Remember Ezra, remember Darius, okay? Remember Cyrus, excuse me. And so Ezra and Nehemiah will make allusions to that information. But at the time of Esther, there were still many Jews in the land of captivity. And of course, these and all the returnees were at that point intended for destruction by the scheme which is put together here. And we will be relating the book. But Darius reigned from 522 to 486, and then he was succeeded by Xerxes in 486 to about 463, probably about 20 years, maybe a little more. But Xerxes is the Ahasuerus of the book of Esther, as identified in here. The book opens basically the 3rd year of the reign of Xerxes in 483 BC, when King had Vashti, his queen, deposed on the advice of his counselors. And we'll see how that goes on. The first 22 verses of Esther 1, 10 through 22 will give us a rundown on how that happened. Okay? But during the next 4 years after, between the deposing, or the deposition and the banishing, perhaps a little worse than that, of Queen Vashti. He led this unsuccessful campaign, and it softened him. Okay, and when he returned, he was looking for another wife, if you will, another queen, perhaps another concubine to assuage his disappointment. Okay, but during that period of time, Esther became the queen, and therefore she was able to save her people. And we'll see Haman's conspiracy and how easily the viziers could actually turn the king's ear, because he was a man who was cruel, perhaps not as thoughtful as he should have been. And so, but there was one thing that we'll note, and that is the principle in the Medo-Persian Empire of the immutability of law. Once a law was passed, remember that's exactly how the Jews were able to reinforce their position as their legal position as they rebuilt the temple, and later as they built the walls around Jerusalem. They were able to rely on the records and the law that was recorded, where Cyrus had said that he was sending the Jews back to do just exactly that, to build the temple. And Cyrus's reason was so that they could pray for him. Okay? And that law was on the books. This law that went on the books, and we'll see that it gave any Persian the right to kill a Jew. All right? But there was a loophole, and we'll see what that loophole is. Okay? But as we continue on, I want to note that. But we know also that as we read this, you'll be asking yourself, where is God mentioned in this book? And God mentioned specifically, although Mordecai will make reference to him in a conversation that he has with Esther, as he encourages her to approach the king. Okay? And basically says, if you don't do it, God's going to find somebody else, and you're going to be left by the wayside and not have a part of it. Okay? So, although he is unnamed, he is still involved in the events, and we will see that Esther and Mordecai who preserved Abraham. So, Pat, are you ready to read?
Sure.
Okay, we'll see how much we can cover in about 10 minutes or so here of the book of Esther. You're going to see the events that will lead up to, and all we'll be dealing with at this point is how and why Vashti was removed as queen. It's pretty infuriating, actually. So keep going, please. Start in chapter 1, verse 1.
Now it came to pass in the days of Anahizar, this was Anahizar which reigned from India, 27 provinces, that in those days when the king Anahizar sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in the Sushan palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all the princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him.
Okay, being before him. All right, so now we look at the first 2 verses, and we talk about Ahasuerus sitting on the throne of his kingdom. And we talk about the southern palace, the Shushan, and I showed you where that was in relation to, for instance, Babylon. But we talk about how big this area is. This area stretches from India all the way to into northern Africa, Ethiopia. Okay, not just Egypt, into Ethiopia, a vast kingdom. Okay, and we know that he had 127 provinces. Each one of those provinces, and this was something that Darius had instituted, where he had appointed kings and princes and satraps, governors, if you will, of all these places to fulfill the administration in his place because of such vast. It speaks about the reign of Ahasuerus in the beginning of his reign, wrote they unto him an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Remember, these are the satraps who are trying to stop the children of Israel from rebuilding the temple. And so they write this letter accusing them, saying, remember, they said these folks are going to rebel against you because they dare to do that. Am I not on? There, I'm on now. All right, thank you. Okay, so I hope y'all have gotten all this up to now, but if you didn't, well, maybe you can go back over the slide and stuff and get it. But in Daniel 6, we see that Darius is set to set over the kingdom. 120 princes, actually it was 127, eventually. These were his what are called satraps or will. Okay, and so that custom, that procedure continued because Darius wrote a law that said that would be the way that it was. And so it wasn't going to be changed, okay, because Xerxes couldn't do it. He did not have the administrative power to change a law written by a previous king, okay, to strike it from the books and change the way that business was being done. All right. So we look at Esther. Continue on, please. Do verse 3 and 4, if you would.
In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast unto all the princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, and the nobles and princes of the provinces before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty, many days, even 180 days.
104, half a year, 6-month-long party is what he's thrown for all of his governors. I have to ask myself the question, who's minding the store when all these satraps and governors are up there? Remember, that's what caused Babylon to fall, is that the Babylonian king called all of his governors and rulers, and while he was there, the Medes marched right in and took over, and they were hardly even opposed at all. Okay, but we look at this, and we look at the feast, and we look at the riches he laid to impress these men. Okay, all right. So they party. Keep going.
And when these days were expired, the king made a feast unto all the people that were present in Sushkan, the palace, both great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace, where were white, green, and blue hangings fastened with cords of linen purple to silver rings, and pillars of marble. The beds of gold and silver were pavement of red and blue, white, and black and marble.
There was a lot of splendor there. It was all a very impressive display. Continue.
And they gave them drink in vessels of gold. The vessels were diverse one from another, and the royal wine in abundance according to the state of the king. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for the king had appointed all the officers of his to every man's pleasure.
So he didn't force it on them, but he said, drink as much as you want, have as good a time as you want, do it the way you want to do it. All right, keep going.
And Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to the king Xerxes.
So all the women who were the wives, basically, of these satraps and rulers were there with them. And so Vashti entertained them as well. Keep going.
On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with Harbona, Bigatha, Agatha, and Charis, the 7 chaplains, to serve in the presence of Cyrus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on.
So I can understand that she must have been a beautiful woman, because otherwise, why would this king have had any interest in her at all? And so he basically wanted to show his wife off. Probably wanted her to dance for them. Okay, but see, he called Vashti out of the company of all of the other wives. All right. Known to them that he wanted her to do this. All right. Well, Vashti didn't take that very well. All right. So keep going.
But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains, Therefore the king was very wroth, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men, which knew the times, so was the king's manner towards all that knew the law and judgment. And next, Sheshar, Adamar, Tarish, Marcia, Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, which saw the king's face, and which sat the first in the kingdom.
So they sat before the king. They saw the king's face. He granted them audience. King didn't grant a lot of people audience. In fact, if you came into his presence without his permission, there was a death penalty imposed for that. Okay, so we look at these men. These are his viziers. These are his inner circle, if you will. Okay, and they are insulted that the queen won't come and dance for them, and so they've got the king's ear, and so they ask this question, and the king asks this question, and he says, "What am I going to do?" I'm surprised that he asked things relative to how he and his wife got along, but he was so intent on making an impression that their idea of how he ran his household was more important to him than his own. So here we go, verse 15 and through 15 and 16.
What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law? Because she has not performed the commandment of the king Xerxes by the chamberlains. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen has not done wrong to the king only, but also to the princes and to all the people that are in the province of the king Xerxes.
So they've said, you've not only insulted the king, you've insulted everybody that the king rules. All right. This is an insult to the whole realm, to the whole province. All right. So now needs to happen. Read verse 18 through verse 18.
For this deed the queen shall come abroad to all women, so that they shall despise their husbands in their eyes. And when it shall be reported, the king Xerxes commanded Vashti the queen to be brought before him, but she came. Likewise shall the ladies of Persia and Media say in the day of the king and the princes which have heard of the deed of the queen, there shall arise too much contempt and wrath.
Okay, so what is he doing? He's kind of making her an outcast, but it's worse than that. He's banishing her. Okay, he's deposing her as queen. He's banishing her and putting her in the other household. She's literally being passed around from household to household to household through the realm. I'm not sure what that implies, but the wives were not happy about it. And so you can kind of fill in the blanks on your own if you want to. But the point is that they despised her. They were to look at her as a homewrecker. All right? And so that was the goal of it. Continue on, please, and go through verse 21.
If it pleases the king, let there go a royal command be written among the laws of the Persians and Medes, that it be not Vashti come no before the king Xerxes, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she. And when the king's decree, which he shall be punished throughout all his empire, for it is great, all the wives shall give to their husbands honor, both great and small.
And okay, and verse 21.
The saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan.
So Memucan was the spokesman for all the other men. But what were they trying to do? They were trying to establish the principle that the king, or the ruler, or the governor has absolute control over his wife. She must do anything that he says to establish that principle. That's a pretty chauvinistic thing, isn't it? And yet that's the state that women were in there. But I note here that verse 19 says, and reestablishes that principle of immutability written in among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered. That is inalterability of the law. That's the principle, the immutability. And so that Vashti would never again see King Ahasuerus or give her a royal estate. And so the king gave her royal estates to someone else. All right? That was the plan. And so this decree was published, and the wives were subjected to their husbands by law, totally subjected to their husbands by law. Okay? Now, continue on, please.
For he sent letters into the king's provinces, to every province according to written thereof, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and that it should be published according to the language of every people.
So he passed that law, and he made sure that it was written in the language of all of the different provinces, so there would be no doubt that according to the law of the king, the man had total control over the woman. Okay? And that was a principle that was established not just these kings, but every man should bear rule in his own. Women had no status in the kingdom at that point. All right? Okay. So that's where we'll break. That is how Vashti lost her crown. That is how the situation, the stage was set for Esther to come on the scene. Are there any questions at this point? Pat, thank you for reading today, and we will we'll look at Esther being chosen to be the queen, and we might actually even get to Haman's plot as note that Mordecai saves the king's life. We'll see that too, and then but the king has a short memory; he kind of forgets that. All right, okay. So, are there questions at this time? Take a break. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Thank you very much. Those of you who are on your way in, come on in. Today's fellowship meal. So that shouldn't be your primary incentive for getting here, but if you're here, we will welcome you. Thank you.